Good morning, Senator. Today we have a special show. We'll have a guest who is going to do a deeper dive into the FBI breaking with the ADL and other groups. But first, I want to turn it over to Senator Black, who wants to give us a little briefing about some other important issues. So I want to pass it over to you.
Okay, fine. Well, we're this morning on our primary topic, which deals with the FBI and the Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center. We have with us Diane Sare, who is she is a former candidate for New York Senate. A very, very accomplished woman, and she's going to fill us in on that. But first, I want to just touch on something that's really very important that's going on. And this is a case that's just been heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't have the style of the case in front of me, but basically it is a challenge to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which has already been downsized, but it still has a provision that allows the creation of so-called opportunity zones, where in order to increase the minority representation in Congress, in 1965, the U.S. Congress which was totally dominated by the Democrats. Democrat President Lyndon Johnson, Democrat House, everything Democrat. And they rammed through this Voting Rights Act, which, everybody was really very sympathetic to the cause of civil rights and that kind of thing. And what they did, it was very cunning because they flipped civil rights on its head. 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which was enacted after the Civil War, said that people could not be treated unequally based on their race, that people were entitled to equality not equal treatment by the government. And so the Civil Rights Act 1965, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965, sort of flipped the whole thing on its head, and it said, well, you really don't have to treat people equally based on their race if it can help to get more minorities in Congress. And of course, the minorities, because of some things Lyndon Johnson had done, he had established this welfare state with food stamps and welfare housing and all of this. And so they had really locked in the black vote. And so it was a very cunning thing, because the Voting Rights Act really flipped the 14th Amendment on its head. And it said, no, you really don't have to treat people equally based on the race. In order to sort of make up for lost time, you can go in and you can create gerrymandered congressional districts. They're called opportunity districts. And what you can do is you can put together different groups of or different pockets of black voters in order that they can elect a black representative. Well, this was really sort of the opposite of what the 14th Amendment said. 14th Amendment really called on government to be colorblind. It said, that we're going to treat people as people. We're not going to treat them as people with this color and that color. And the Voting Rights Act of 65 sounded like it was favorable to civil rights, but it was really a very blatant violation of the 14th Amendment. And there was a case in Florida fairly recently where the Florida Supreme Court, applying federal law, overturned a voting district. I'm from Florida originally, and I'm very familiar with the area. They had they had created a district whose sole purpose was to get a black uh, congressman. It wasn't to get somebody who was elected by the people generally, but it was to specifically uh, put a person of a certain race into office, which was sort of an anathema to the 14th Amendment. But they stretched it. There's a fairly large concentration of African Americans in Jacksonville, very large city on the east coast of Florida. And Florida's structure is sort of like a big L, if you want to think of it, an inverted L, where uh, the main part of Florida that we all think about is very, very long. But then there's a panhandle that is also very long, and it goes east. So the one goes north and south, the other one goes east and west. Well, so on the east coast of that panhandle, you have the big city of Jacksonville. Um, and they stretched this line going all the way over and picking up pockets of, of minority voters. They went to Tallahassee, Florida, which really, if ever there was a place that had nothing in common with Jacksonville, it was Tallahassee. Tallahassee's more sort of rural kind of an area, but they picked up a particular concentration of minority voters there and connected them with what they had in Jacksonville and some other things. They had this very long, convoluted district, and the sole purpose of it was to make sure that people could vote for a representative of their own skin color, of their own race. And this is really what we were trying to avoid, is the idea that we wanted everybody to participate, and we didn't want to stack the deck in terms of race. Um, Clearly, we never could have done this if Florida had said, look, we want to connect certain groups of white voters, put them all into one district so that white voters can elect a white representative. I mean, nobody would question for a second that was unlawful under the 14th Amendment. So anyway, the Supreme Court seems inclined to, I don't know whether they'll totally repeal the Voting Rights Act or whether they will simply pare it down. But one way or the other, it looks like they're going to do something pretty substantial. And if so, if you end up outlawing these racially gerrymandered opportunity districts, it could shift power within the Congress pretty substantially. So it's very important, and we'll see what happens. I really, I was part of, well, I wasn't part of the civil rights movement, but I personally worked to end segregation when I was just a young, simple-faced teenage boy, and I didn't like the fact that the buses that we rode to were segregated, and so I began riding in the area that was literally marked colored only. It said that was stenciled on the area of the bus, and I went one time, and there were all black workmen there, and I went up. I said, "Sir," I said, "may I have a seat?" And they kind of thought, "Oh gosh, what is this?" So, and I sat, and from then on, I sat in that section of the bus. And then later, one time when the bus was really packed with people, there was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, and she was a Black woman, and she was standing up. And the custom in the South was that a young man stood up and he gave his seat to a woman. And but of course the rule was segregation. And I was in the front of the bus, which was the whites only part. And so I stood up and spoke to the woman. I said, "Ma'am," I said, "would you like a seat?" And she wasn't just joyous and smiley, because I was sort of hooking her into what I was doing, but she did. She sat down, and and I'm sure there were people in the bus who thought, what is this creepy pimple-faced kid doing up there? But I think by that time there were starting to be people who were saying, this is wrong. This is, doing demeaning things is wrong. So anyway, that, I started from the very beginning believing in equal rights, but I've seen the whole thing distorted very terribly, and it's resulted in tremendous racial polarization that I think is unnecessary. And anyway, I hope the Supreme Court will do the right thing, and the more that if they can just repeal the whole act, just find it unlawful, that would certainly meet my satisfaction. I don't know whether they'll go that far, but I think they'll improve it one way or the other.
Well, we'll certainly be keeping our eye on it. I think now it's time that we should bring in our guests for the further discussion. All right.
Yes. Well, we're looking forward to Diane.
Yes. So let's go ahead and bring Diane Sare to the stage. Hello, Diane.
Hi. Very good to see both of you, and thank you for inviting me.
Good morning, Diane. Well, you were going to talk with us about the recent decision, which was absolutely shocking to me, and it dealing with what the FBI had done. So why don't you take it and let us know what they did and what you think about it.
Sure. Okay. Well, maybe Morgan can actually pull up the picture of Kash Patel with the announcement that the FBI would no longer be coordinating directly with the Anti-Defamation League. Here's one take on it inside the FBI's dramatic divorce from the ADL. And I believe, at least I've heard, I have not validated this myself, but apparently one of the FBI agents sent to investigate the Charlie Kirk assassination came from Connecticut, whose office was at least in the same building as the Anti-Defamation League, maybe even shared an office. So I think there's very good reason for this. It's long overdue. And I just want to go back a little, because it's very, very clear that the Anti-Defamation League was involved in political targeting, harassment. There's a 1990 through 92 case from California where they got caught. But I'll come back to that in a minute. The reason why I happened to find out about the ADL and was so happy that they were in trouble was because of their targeting of someone I worked with very closely, Lyndon LaRouche, which I didn't realize came immediately after a book called Dope Incorporated. And LaRouche had a publication which was actually shut down by the FBI, not Kash Patel's FBI, but the other FBI, Bill Webster and others, called War on Drugs. And as you might guess from the cover of this journal, it was our view that the drug trade was not actually coordinated by a bunch of 15-year-olds in the ghetto, but was coordinated on a very high level by the bankers. And in fact, I don't have it here, but people can Google a photograph of none other than Richard Grasso, the head of the New York Stock Exchange in the 90s, in an embrace with Comandante Raul Reyes in the jungles of Colombia, the FARC. So what happened was EIR, LaRouche's associates, Jeff Steinberg, among others, published this book on the drug trade, going after the banks. And the next thing you know, the Anti-Defamation League was writing dossier after dossier. Lyndon LaRouche, Holocaust denier, anti-Semite, was saying, what is this? What is the connection? So it turns out, if you look into their background, the Anti-Defamation League was really nothing but a front for organized crime. For years, you know the name Meyer Lansky, Edgar Bronfman of Seagram's got to start bootlegging during Prohibition, money from drug trafficking, narcotics, prostitution. So somehow they get protection by pretending that they're actually concerned to stop anti-Semitism. So it's really quite a racket. And then I think what may have led to the particular decision of the FBI was this case that emerged in 1990-91, where it turns out that the Anti-Defamation League was involved. And the reason that this was uncovered was a Republican Congressman, Pete McCloskey. His wife was concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people and went on a trip to the West Bank in, I think, 1989. And when she came back, somehow the FBI and the Mossad had details of things that happened on this trip. And so I think a case emerged where he discovered that the Anti-Defamation League had been involved in selling enormous volumes of material, illicit spying, that they were in bed with the FBI, with the local police department, and selling their ill-gotten information to the Mossad and to the South African apartheid regime at the time. And the key guy involved in this was a fellow named Roy Bullock, who was the one who got caught. And and this never, I'm just going to say what they had on him. People can make their own conclusion, because the case ended up ending, no charges were brought, but there was a prominent leader of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, who was killed by, his name was Alex Ode. He was killed by a bomb attack on a bomb was left on his front porch, I believe, in 1985. He blown up and killed. And it turned out that this character, Roy Godson, had an appointment to, not Roy Godson, Roy Bullock, had an appointment to interview him on the very day he got blown up. And when they got the files from Roy Bullock, they discovered detailed floor plans of Alex Ode's home. So very, very suspicious. So what Congressman McCloskey said is that while no one in the Anti-Defamation League went to jail, they paid a lot of money. And what he thought was a very happy result is that 9 bankers' boxes full of files that had been in the possession of Roy Bullock were released. And when these boxes were released, they discovered that the Anti-Defamation League had been colluding with various intelligence agencies to collect data on 20,000 Americans involved in 950 different political associations. So I think Kash Patel's decision to separate from this organized crime apparatus that runs around smearing people and muddying the waters and claiming they care about human rights, anti-Semitism, and racism, which merely served as a cover for them to exactly violate those rights and go on to carry out their money laundering and everything else.
Yeah, now a lot of this is sort of beyond my understanding of it, and I wouldn't go so far as to call them an organized crime outfit, but but I do know that they are very heavily biased, and that they have had an undue influence over different elements of government, including the FBI. The FBI, at the same time that they broke their ties with the Anti-Defamation League, they also broke their ties with the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has always struck me as one of the most hate-filled groups that there is. So I suspect there's some commonality between them. It's one of the main political tools of liberalism has been to not to engage in legitimate debate, but to smear your opponent, to use some sort, well, they're a this or they're a that, or they, deny this or they promote that or whatever. Instead of saying, okay, what are the issues and what do we believe? Here are our ideas and here are your ideas. And I'm a little more familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center, where I know that I think part of their gig is to put people on this hate map that they have, and to declare that they're racist, they're bigots, or whatever, which has very, very major legal impacts when you're when you go in on these discrimination suits and so forth. And if you can smear someone and put them in a particular box, you don't have to look at whether they've discriminated or not. You just say, well, they're bad people. They ought to pay a fine because we don't like them. And so it's I know that particular organization's had enormously destructive effects on the relations among people. We have a culture that involves various races, different national origins and so forth, different religions. And the most destructive thing in the world is to say, well, we can now start smearing certain groups and diminishing them and raising up this group. And I know ADL is very quick to label people as anti-Semites. So I would imagine, and perhaps you can enlighten, but I would imagine that anyone who opposes Netanyahu and his very merciless wars in the Middle East is, by definition, an anti-Semite. You're against Jewish people. Well,
or a terrorist. They even take it farther. You're a terrorist sympathizer.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to say one thing on the ADL, because your point about actually the counterculture is really critical. And the ADL got involved in a fight that I was familiar with in Texas. You probably remember, I think it was 1989, this satanic cult, the Matamoros gang, that brutally murdered an American college student. I may be getting the year slightly off. I believe it was 1989. And so a group of citizens in Texas tried to get the local government to enact some kind of resolution outlawing satanic rituals. That is not, okay, you can believe whatever you want, you can think whatever you want, but when it comes to drinking blood, sacrificing animals, we think this should be illegal. And it was the Anti-Defamation League that came in full force and said, oh, no, you cannot do this, because the next thing you know, they're going to be outlawing circumcision. Now, why would they come in to defend this kind of degenerate activity. And we see this, I think, with the so-called transgender movement, where people want to impose, you know, really things that are not on the minds of children when they're 5 and 6 years old. And somehow that's equated with civil rights. And I think both these organizations, the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center, have sort of come in on this, which is really, it's really an affront to what it means to be a human being. What is sacred about a human being? What is sacred about a child? Their innocence, their potential, right? Their unknown potential. That's what people see when they see a child, which is so very exciting. And you want to protect that. So the fact that the ADL would come in explicitly after this horrible murder by a satanic cult to counter what the people in the area were trying to do on that matter.
You know, it's an interesting thing. One of the most difficult things under our culture is to advocate for a moral society. Anytime there is an attempt to reinforce morals within our culture, it's like you're suddenly descended upon by vultures, and they try to rip the flesh off your bones. And I don't know. I mean, there's a very broad cultural issue at work here, and but it is interesting that you will find groups that will come to the defense of the most profoundly evil elements of society. One of the things along those lines is the opposition to the death penalty. I was responsible for all Department of Defense death penalty cases back in the early 90s when I was the chief of the criminal law division in the office of the Judge Advocate General of the Army. And the way that it works, all services sort of fell under our purview for death penalty. So we had a very liberal Supreme Court, and they had tightened up on death penalty. And so the military went through this enormous drill, sort of rejiggering our whole system, making sure everything was in strict compliance with the Supreme Court rulings. And we were ready to start carrying out the executions. And then Bill Clinton was elected president. And I was called into the office of Major General John Fu, the Judge Advocate General. And he told me, look, he said, we're going to have to do a comprehensive review of all of our procedures for dealing with death penalty cases. And I said, what? I said, we just spent the last several years going through this, going through court actions and going to Congress and getting legal changes and all this. And you're saying we've got to start from square one? And anyway, he and I had a very angry conversation, but he was a Democrat. And he had very, very high level Democrat connections, and the general did. And he was doing what the president, I have to his credit, he was doing what the president wanted, which was to stop the death penalty. And to look at the cases, the one that always stands out in my mind is there was a fellow who he was a very domineering and fearful man. He had a large family, and he decided he hated his family. He wanted to kill them. And he forced them to line up outside the bathroom. And one by one, he took them and he drowned them in the bathtub. And as one would drown, he'd drag them out, throw them on the floor, and the next person in line had to step forward. And he was so feared, so dreaded, that he was able to maintain control of this group, and he serially drowned every human being. This is the kind of person that this liberal force within our culture steps in to save, and the ones that you're mentioning, the satanic cult that's carrying out these blood drinking rituals and so forth. And I think there's a commonality among almost all of the liberal organizations that if there is a moral principle involved, you must oppose it. You must oppose it. And
Well,
it's hard for a person of sort of ordinary morality to grasp. Now, most people don't even know all of these facts because they just, there are young people who are being executed, or there's somebody who, he doesn't have a high IQ. How can you possibly execute a person who is dumb and evil? Aren't we supposed to only execute people who are smart and evil? Most people, they don't have the time to delve into these things, so they don't really connect the dots and say, "Hey, wait a minute, this is nuts. What we're talking about."
Senator, actually, with all due respect, I have really come to the position that I don't think we should use the death penalty. I think there may be a reason in the time of war where someone is a traitor and you cannot prevent them from doing irreparable harm to your cause, perhaps in that narrow case. But there are two reasons for my opposition. One is that I think if the state itself decides that it can end the life of one of its citizens, that is a dangerous precedent. And we see, unfortunately, too much of now, and I know in your argument, you would never put that together with physician-assisted suicide and these other kinds of policies to terminate the useless eaters. But also, I think if you think about Saul being converted to Paul, the amazing thing about human beings is that they could possibly change. That doesn't mean they should be out running around. There is a place perhaps for life imprisonment. We also have shut down over 90% of our inpatient psychiatric beds in this country, which creates a horrible situation on the streets that law enforcement is confronted with all over the place. How do you deal with people having psychotic episodes who are criminally insane, and there's no place to put them away? And actually, these organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, I was going to bring up, there was such a case of an African-American mentally impaired individual who did not, because he was poor, didn't get a trial where you actually knew if he was guilty or not. This was in 1992. I was personally in Alabama trying to stop the execution of this fellow, and the Southern Poverty Law Center didn't lift a finger. They weren't remotely interested in this case at all. And I had a dear friend, now deceased, Reverend Richard Boone, who was a associate of Martin Luther King, an African-American minister, and like Dr. King, super well educated. The first time I heard him speak, he was quoting Shakespeare. I mean, just genius, nonviolent. And he had a real case of racial discrimination, and I forget all the details. He went to the Southern Poverty Law Center to try and get aid. Nothing. So they really are a fraud from beginning to end. And I think what you said of politically smearing people, anyone who says there's a standard of truth, that you can say whether something is right or wrong, that this is innately in human beings, that we know it. Because I think that's what makes someone evil, is they deliberately go against what they know to be good. That is a choice. So I think you're on the matter of these institutions. I think you're absolutely correct. But I had to say, on the question of the death penalty, I have some differences for those reasons.
Sure, and I respect that. We could debate long and hard, because there's a wonderful Democrat Commonwealth's attorney in Fairfax County years ago. His name was Bob Horan. The first time I was ever asked to run for office, they were trying to recruit me to run for Commonwealth's attorney in Fairfax County against Bob. And so I looked into him. I thought, okay, well, let me see who this guy is. And what I found, I ended up having such enormous respect for the man. I said, there's no way that I would run against him. And then later I was elected. I was in the House of Delegates at the time. And Bob Horan he had been elected by all of the Commonwealth's attorneys to sort of be their representative to the legislature. And so Bob would defend the death penalty, among other things. You know, he had a whole portfolio, but anyway, I was his primary ally on the Courts of Justice Committee in the House of Delegates. So Bob would make his presentation, and then he would be under attack, and then I would come in, and there were some graphic examples that I could give that tended to sort of quiet the discussion a little bit. But anyway, but it's an issue that I know people of goodwill have differing opinions on, and I know that you are very much a person of goodwill, and I certainly respect that. But it is interesting. Were you surprised that Kash Patel distanced the FBI from the ADL?
Yes, I was. I was pleasantly surprised.
I was. It sort of goes contrary to some of the trends taking place with the administration right now, and it just struck me as a very stand-up thing, because I do see the ADL. I'm not as much an expert on them as I'm not an expert on either one, but I've watched the Southern Poverty Law Center for decades now, so I know where they come out, and I've watched to a lesser extent the ADL, and this same approach of being able to smear people is such a powerful thing in our culture, to call people a racist, to call them an anti-Semite. And it's easy, because you can simply say, well, they're a racist because they're against this policy or that policy. They may have spent a lifetime working for full rights for everyone without any bias. It doesn't matter. And the same thing with this thing about anti-Semitism. You could have all of the Jewish friends and colleagues that you want, but if you don't believe that civilians should be slaughtered in Gaza by Israeli soldiers at the direction of Benjamin Netanyahu, then suddenly you're an anti-Semite. If you
There's
don't
another,
believe,
actually,
go ahead.
something that goes with this, which is a terrible thing, is this idea of guilt by association, right? So if you're ever seen with someone who maybe did say an anti-Semitic thing or did somehow, no one ever has to find out what you think. You are smeared by virtue of your association with that person, or even worse, attended an event with thousands of people because you were curious to hear what so and so had to say, and the next thing you know, you're in a terrorist racist cult or something. It's very cheap, and it's a way of silencing debate among people and not allowing people to have strong friendships in spite of disagreements, even substantial disagreements, but nonetheless you can work forward for good ends.
That's really important what you say. It's also a way of walling off important information so that people feel that if they look under the rock to discover a millipede, then don't look under the rock, because if you look under the rock, you know it's forbidden. And it's a very unhealthy thing for our society not to question. I mean, why shouldn't we question what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing? Had it not been for the very violent event with Hamas and the Jewish settlements adjoining the Gaza Strip, Netanyahu might very well have been thrown out of office because he was under criminal indictment. His wife was under criminal indictment. He had become terribly unpopular, and but he was able to, rally people to war. And people tend to put other things aside when there's a war. So it's not like this man was a saint. This man was despised by a major part of the Jewish population of Israel, and probably it was probably a majority that disliked the man.
Did you see the video when Steve Witkoff was there and he mentioned Netanyahu and the 500,000 people gathered to hear him all started booing in Tel Aviv? It was really something.
Is that right?
He said, "Thank Netanyahu, boo, boo," and he goes, "Okay."
Well, I'm glad they did, because maybe that sent a message to him that this is not the view of all people of Israel. So and they've turned it around, and you see this on a lot of the right wing sort of evangelical type of voices, where they'll say, well, this is somebody who disagrees with Netanyahu, and that means that you're against war against Gaza, war against the peaceful people in the West Bank, war against Lebanon, war against Syria, war against Libya, war against Iraq, war against Afghanistan. You're against all of those wars if you're against, you must be an anti-Semite if you don't think that we should be attacking 8 or 10 countries throughout the Middle East. Well, I certainly disagree. I mean, in high school, I had just joined a fraternity. We happened to have really fine high school fraternity. They were very much like college fraternities in those days, and I was kind of honored. I had a great number of Jewish friends. We had a fairly heavily Jewish population at Miami Senior High School, where I attended. It's a very, very big school, about 5,000 kids. And I was in a group of kids that were into science. And in fact, I was one of the 3 semifinalists in the Westinghouse science competition for our school. It was a very big deal. This was during John F. Kennedy's time, and I was a pretty gifted chemist, and so there were 2 Jewish girls and myself. We were the winners of the competition. We had a playoff. I beat one of them, and the other one beat me, probably fair and square. And so, I was invited to join a Jewish fraternity, and I was touched by it, and I probably would have done it had I not started to pledge the other fraternity already. But so I had lots of Jewish friends. My father was with Internal Revenue Service, and a great number of the agents, I would say probably half anyway, were Jewish at the time. And so we had Jewish friends over the home all the time. And as you know, you and I both have many contacts who are very, very intellectually accomplished Jewish individuals. I know with the LaRouche organization, many quite accomplished people that so nobody opposes Jewish people. It's just I think I have a tremendous dislike of Benjamin Netanyahu, not personally, but I just don't like people slaughtering children, targeting little boys and little girls, and having snipers shoot them in the knees so that they'll be crippled for life, setting out food in remote places where starving people by the thousands come desperately seeking food, and then you gun them down. 93 people gunned down, unarmed, helpless, starving people. 93 butchered on a single Sunday. This has been 6 weeks, two months ago, and so that's what I dislike. I don't dislike Jewish people. I dislike anyone who is just very deliberately slaughtering helpless, innocent, starving people.
Right. And I think Jewish people would say, what does this have to do with Judaism? Just as the Christian would say, what does the Inquisition have to do with Christianity? People do all kinds of horrible things and try and put in a religious affiliation with it. But if you look at the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there is supposed to be a certain sanctity about the nature of human life and how human beings are supposed to treat each other. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That was even Confucius believed that. So it really is a kind of a fraud just designed to silence people and scare them from recognizing certain universal qualities that we share.
Yeah. Well, listen, Diane, I very much appreciate you being with us today. You have some of the history and involved in all of this that is enlightening, and we appreciate you coming. Morgan, thank you very much for.
Yes, thank you. I'm honored too that I was able to witness the back and forth between you two. And Diane, I'm always you have my greatest respect and everything you do. You and the LaRouche and the Schiller Institute always take principled stances and bring forth the facts and historical evidence to back it up. So it was an honor to hear all this, and thank you.
The honor is mine. I really am happy to be with the senator, and I know your love of the nation, which I share, and your courage, and it's very important and needed.
Thank you. And I hope that we can do this again some other time. And I will see you soon, Diane. I'll be up in New York. So
Great.
we get to work together soon. And I would like to encourage everybody to join us next week to focus on the news. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.